Hey, action figure and toy fans! Scott ToyGuru Neitlich back on the Spectre Creative Channel. I've been in the toy industry professionally for over 20 years, but I'm also a collector myself, which tends to make me a little unique in the industry, that I kind of push to make things that, well, I want to personally collect, and that tends to work a lot because I have kind of that collector bug. Today, we're going to talk about limited edition items, and specifically items that are numbered, or if you will, the production run is given as part of an item. You'll see this a lot on things like certificates of authenticity, where they will number, this is number, 02375 out of, X number. Well, this one doesn't say what the total run is, but you get the point. You've seen that. And this shows up on toys quite often. You'll see collectible toys in all categories, be it dolls, action figures, race cars, even games, which will sometimes list things, series names, like this is, number 1 of 4, but we'll also see really high-end items that have that more certificate of authenticity approach, where right there on the package, it will be labeled, this is set number 15 of 500. And this is something, Mattel specifically, because I'm showing some Mattel product and I work for Mattel, Mattel doesn't do this anymore. And a lot of people have asked me when I worked at Mattel why we never gave out production numbers. And I will get into that in a moment. But I wanted to give a little background on limited editions, whether they're done in the doll category or the action figure category, whatever it is. The production run tends to be a piece of information that collectors are really driven to. And for this, we kind of have to look at the start of adult collector collecting. Adult collector action figure collecting. That's better. A lot of people point to this piece, and this is a great piece to point to. It's the very first Spawn figure from Todd Toys, which then became McFarlane Toys. Really broke the system, if you will, by offering, a lot of detail, a lot of deco, a lot of articulation that wasn't available. And a lot of folks point to this as the very first adult collector action figure that was made available at mass. And while this is an amazing figure, and I bought this figure when it came out, I would actually point to this one as the first adult collector item. This was the notorious 1701 Star Trek set, where only 1,701 of these were ever produced. The number being the Enterprise's call number, having, meaning to the fan base. But that meant that these 3 figures, there were less than 2,000 of them out there. And arguably, there's more than 2,000 Star Trek fans wanting this set. And this really, to me, in my mind, started adult collecting. And the limited number posted right there on the package was a big part of that. Now, other toys have taken this approach. This is kind of the opposite example, where they did a 25th anniversary Wolverine figure that was noted as limited to 1 of 25,000. So on one hand, you had that Star Trek set that had less than 2,000 made, and now here you have a all-silver Wolverine with 25,000 out there. And I can tell you this is way more than the average run for a 6-inch action figure. There's probably more of these Wolverines out there than there are most other Marvel Legends, which is crazy because he's all silver and, anniversary. Another case that's more like that Star Trek one that's at shelf now, or current, August 2020, is this Gigawatt Transformers, which is limited to 1,985, or 1985, which was the year the movie took place. So they're limiting it based on, similar to Star Trek, a number that means something in the franchise, not necessarily a number that is based on how many units they could sell. All right, so let's look at something like HasLab that does give out its numbers for pre-sale. They have had a lot of success by putting up items, telling fans we need this amount of backers, and we can produce these gigantic, huge items that otherwise might not make it out to market, based on fans supporting it. And in this case, their first item they did was Jabba's sail barge, which succeeded, but they've also had items like Cookie Monster here who didn't succeed. And the whole time you saw right there how many units were either going to make or break it. Like the X-Men Sentinel here, which needed 6,000 backers, and as of August 5th, when I'm recording this, has, getting close to 13,000 backers, more than twice. Now, Matty Collector / Mattel had our own version of this a couple years ago, where we pre-sold Castle Grayskull in a very similar fashion. Although, unlike HasLab, we didn't require fans to cough up the money ahead of time. They were charged when it shipped, which, in hindsight, might have been a mistake, because it left us with quite a few unclaimed castles, but that's not important right now. We'll get into that when we do the Castle Grayskull video sooner than later. But same thing, we pre-sold it much like the Pulse does by showing images, and those kind of bit us in the butt because things like the dungeon door were shown in the early drawings, but then once we costed it out, we found that this dungeon door alone had as much deco as a regular figure, and we just simply couldn't include it, which, a lot of pre-buyers were angry because this was something shown in the pre-image, and they expected to have everything, rightly so. So, it showed kind of the flaws in the system, but we were able to make the castle because of the pre-sale, and that was because we hit, much like what Pulse is doing with Hasbro, those minimum number of backers. Unlike Pulse, though, when Mattel put this out there, they did not put out how many backers were needed. What we did instead was we had kind of this anonymous meter that showed the amount of the total that we were at and how many we needed. And I understand the frustration a lot of fans felt not knowing what number that goal was, just seeing this meter slowly filling up, reaching a goal, but not understanding what the production number was. The reason for this is Mattel, as a policy, and this isn't secret knowledge or anything, that they no longer give out production numbers. They used to do this. There used to be some high-end Barbies, some high-end Hot Wheels that did right there on the box say, this is limited to 2,000 and this is unit 53 of 2,000 or whatever. But essentially, Mattel doesn't do this anymore. And here's an example when they did with the Certificate of Authenticity, because, well, honestly, there are some very litigious fans out there. And in realizing that you have, the number of figures out there, plus there's prototypes and there's, PP samples, the total production run, counting these early prototypes, can exceed the number offered to the public. So if you're buying a limited edition Barbie and it says it's limited to 2,000 units and you're paying to have unit, 205 out of 2,000, but if you count the pre-production units or the units that are thrown away or destroyed, the mistake units, whatever it was, there might be a handful more than 2,000. And yes, people like to sue over everything, don't they? So it's because of this that Mattel as a company doesn't give out production unit numbers. And that's why, we never gave out the production unit for Castle Grayskull, or the same thing for any of the Matty Collector, like the Motu Classics figures. I would always say, production units is a proprietary information for Mattel, which is true, and I still, even to this day. So what about when you have an item like this that's a limited edition and feels like it's something that should belong in a museum that is super limited and has that certificate? Heck, a lot of us as collectors have museums at home, have glass cases where we put our action figures and collectibles in. So a lot of these items that are feel like they're meant to be in a museum kind of do wind up in a museum, just a private museum, a museum for one, or, you and your guests, if they might come over and show them your toy room or office or whatever other name you give it. So whether companies are putting the production number right on the package and tying this number, in this case, into a number that means something to the franchise and therefore underproducing the product, or they're tying the number into an anniversary and perhaps overproducing the product, like, again, with this Wolverine example, there's not one perfect way of doing it. And as I said, some companies like Mattel don't give out production numbers at all to avoid, misleading people because of early, PP samples, etc. There's no right way to do production numbers. Sometimes it benefits fans, sometimes it hurts fans. If it's an added value and you like that, awesome. Good for you, and you should be able to get certificates of authenticity and production numbers if a company feels comfortable giving those out. but you kind of have to respect every company and why they do or don't give that out, based on situation. And whatever it is you collect, as long as you have the room to store it and show it off, that is awesome, because collecting is all about making ourselves happy. And whatever it is you personally collect and whatever it is that makes you happy and however you like to display it, that's the end of the day what this is all about. Production runs are great, but they're not always going to be available. And when they are, you're not always going to know what number yours is in the run. I hope this video gave a little insight into production numbers and how they're both good and bad for the adult action figure collecting hobby. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and I'd love a subscription. And I'll see you guys around the internet for some more looks at the toy industry and the adult collecting aspect of it. Thanks for watching.